All right, let's get right into it. We all think we know the story of Pinocchio, right? The little wooden puppet, the growing nose, the cute Disney songs. But what if I told you the original story is something else entirely? Something profound and, honestly, brutally dark. That's what we're going to do here. We're going to decode the hidden symbolism in Carlo Collodi's original masterpiece.
So yeah, forget the cartoon, we're going way beyond the children's tale to explore Collodi's work for what it really is, a serious philosophical text. One writer even called it a haunting map of the human condition, and that's the perfect way to put it. This is a guide to becoming human, and believe me, the path is anything but easy.
So here's the plan. First, we'll look at the story's big picture, this idea of an alchemical journey. Then, we'll dive into three huge symbolic moments: the role of the fairy, that terrifying transformation into a donkey, and the crazy rebirth in the sea. It all builds up to that final prize, what it actually means to be human.
Okay, let's set the stage. This story is so much more than a puppet just turning into a boy. You have to see it as a complex, almost painful spiritual transformation. The journey from a chunk of raw, unthinking wood into a conscious, feeling, noble human being.
The key concept we're working with here is alchemical transmutation. You know, like the old alchemists who tried to turn lead into gold? Well, in this story, the base material, the lead, is Pinocchio's wooden body, and the gold he's trying to become, a human soul. But here's the thing, this change isn't magic. It's earned through a whole series of brutal, purifying trials.
And that brings us to the person or force that's really driving this whole process, the Azure Fairy. Now, she is not the sweet, gentle guide you might remember. No way. She's a complex, sometimes even cruel, spiritual engine of his change.
You really have to see her as having two faces. On one hand, she's his anima. She's the blueprint for the very soul and conscience he's trying to build. But on the other hand, she is a rigorous tester. I mean, she uses these incredibly harsh teaching methods from that era. At one point, she literally fakes her own death just to inflict emotional trauma on him, to force him to see how selfish he is. She's not teaching with gentle words. She enforces virtue through fear and loss.
And she doesn't stay the same either. She actually evolves right alongside Pinocchio. When he first meets her, she's this mysterious girl, white as wax, kind of stuck between life and death. Then, as he starts to get a basic moral compass, she becomes like a sister to him. And finally, when he's ready for real responsibility, she becomes a mother. See, she's like a mirror, always reflecting his own spiritual growth.
All right, now for what is maybe the most terrifying part of the whole book, the fall. This is the crucible. This is where Pinocchio faces the horrifying physical price for all his internal failures, for choosing fun over duty. This whole section really comes down to one big question. What is the true cost of refusing to learn? And Collodi's answer is chilling. It's not a bad grade, it's not getting grounded, it's the complete and total loss of your humanity.
And the way this transformation starts is just fascinating. It begins with his ears. Why the ears? Well, think about it. His entire journey up to this point has been defined by his refusal to listen. To Geppetto, to the cricket, to the fairy, the punishment fits the crime perfectly. It's a symbol of how he's used his senses for mischief instead of learning.
What this story is saying here is that his internal flaws, his laziness, his stubbornness, his inner jackassness, can't stay hidden anymore. They physically erupt out of him, turning his private shame into a public humiliation for the whole world to see and mock.
The book actually calls this donkey fever, and it's a terrifying warning. It's this idea that a life of ignorance, of just chasing easy fun, leads to literal dehumanization. The message is clear. If you choose not to learn, the world will treat you like a beast of burden and exploit you.
And you've got to remember, for people in Collodi's 19th century Italy, this was not some fantasy. The donkey was this powerful dual symbol. It stood for stupidity, sure, but it also represented the brutal, backbreaking manual labor that was the reality for anyone who was uneducated. So turning into a donkey wasn't just symbolic. It was a reflection of a very real, very harsh social truth.
So, how in the world can he come back from something like that? Well, this next part shows us that redemption is not a gentle process. It happens in the sea, and it is an agonizing, painful purification.
If there's one phrase to remember for this part of the story, it's this: a gruesome but necessary purification. This is not a calm, peaceful baptism. It is a baptism of pain, and it's designed to literally strip away everything corrupt that he's become.
I mean, just look at this process. He's thrown into the sea as a worthless donkey. And then, in this totally shocking scene, the fairy sends fish to literally eat the donkey flesh off his bones. They consume the layers of his corruption, the physical evidence of his sins, until all that's left is the original wooden puppet. It proves that his core self, his spirit, was still in there, buried but not destroyed.
And that brings us to the end game. After all this trial, all this suffering, the prize is finally in sight. But becoming human, well, it's not a gift. It is a reward that has been earned through fire and, quite literally, through water.
This table really sums up the whole alchemical equation. You can see how all the pieces fit together. The fairy provides that spiritual blueprint, the goal. The donkey phase gives him the physical suffering he needs. The sea is the crucible that purifies him, and Pinocchio himself is the base material that gets transformed by it all.
So the story's main argument is pretty harsh, but it's crystal clear. True understanding, true humanity, only comes after you have been completely and utterly broken down. Pinocchio had to be humiliated, sold off, and literally skinned alive by nature before he could finally grasp the true value and weight of being alive.
And this is the ultimate takeaway. In Collodi's world, humanity is not our default setting. It's a high-stakes prize. It's an achievement, something you only win after you have been through hell and back and have finally learned to reject your own selfish ego in favor of love and sacrifice.
Which, of course, leaves us with one last big question. Because this was never just a story about a puppet, was it? It's a map, and it forces us to ask ourselves, what are our own stubborn wooden parts? What pieces of our own ignorance or selfishness need to be broken, purified, and stripped away before we can truly earn the title of being human?